I've got that it is 5:10 right now, and so I'd like to welcome everyone to our specially called City of McMinnville work session this June 30th, 2020. And so I'll turn it over to the city recorder to do a roll call.
Councillor Drapkin. She's here.
Here.
Councillor Garvin.
Here.
Councillor Geary.
Booyah.
Council Stassens and Councillor Peralta are not on yet. Council President Minke.
Here.
And Mayor Hill.
I'm here. Thank you, Claudia. Tonight, our presentation and discussion is going to be on the fire district feasibility with our consultant. And I think what we'll do is turn it over to the chief to make introductions and to bring the topic to the start of our discussion this evening. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Rich. Thank you, Rich.
Mr. Mayor and Councilor, thank you. This evening we have, or this afternoon, I guess it is, we have our consultant team, or at least our two lead members of our team. The CEO of ESCI, Sheldon Gilbert, is here this evening, and also our project manager, Rich Buchanan, is here. Sheldon's up from Dallas, and Rich is up from the Denver area. They'll be taking you through a slight presentation and just seeking to understand what the city of McMinnville and the McMinnville elected officials' concerns are, thoughts are, questions are about what does a consolidation mean, what does it look like, and any other questions you can throw at them. That's what they're here for. They're here to take back issues, questions, concerns that the council may have moving forward. So when they make their recommendations, they can take all that into consideration. And I don't want to go too far into it because that's what their job is. So I'll start just by introducing Rich Buchanan as the speaker to start the process. Any questions for me? This is a step 37 of our 50-step process that we've been working through for the past year and a half.
Thank you, Chief. Yep. And welcome, Rich. It's good to have you, and thank you for all the good work that you've put into this process so far.
Well, thank you very much, and I sure appreciate having me. I can tell you that our CEO doesn't travel with me often, and then suddenly when a project comes up in Yamhill, he can't wait to get here. So, you got to keep your priorities straight.
Yeah, he's heard about all the good wine in this area,
exactly
right?
Exactly it, and we hope to indulge a little of that later. A couple of things before we get started. This is absolutely informal. We can take as much or a little time as you folks want. I want to respect your time, so this is for your benefit. I have a very brief presentation to just show you our, where we've gotten in this project and what we're going to do over the next couple of days. But really, this is about you folks. So if you have questions, please ask me, or eventually just tell me to go away, and then we'll go about our business and we'll move on with it. Can I see some version of this? Oh, there we go. So like I said, please interrupt me anytime. This is for your benefit. All I'm going to basically do is give you an idea of what this program does. This is my backyard, or at least what it was last weekend. I took my daughters backpacking. I truly thought I lived in one of the most beautiful places, but I've been trying to convince your chief to give me a job. I think I would live very well here, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So there's the sections that we go through, and I need to compliment, and I don't just normally do that. The beginning of this is just, we have to gather a myriad of information and data, and there have been a lot of folks, including the ones sitting in this room, who have gone to extraordinary efforts to gather all the financial and statistical data that we have. So I definitely want to point out the fact that these folks here are working hard on this project, and without all their help, we wouldn't have made the progress that we have. Basically, we're probably at about 70%, 80% completion. We'll discuss exactly where we're going to go from here, but the folks here have been amazing, and I want to compliment them. The next section, after we gathered all that information, is we're going to take 9 departments, and we're going to do evaluations on those 9 departments, and we're going to cover a myriad, and I'll show you what that looks like. But we cover everything from their capital assets to their staffing, to actually measuring their response times and their performance. And we summarize all that in this report. So what we've been doing for the past 2 months is basically doing a baseline evaluation of all the organizations that are involved. Based on that information, we have now developed a very rough sketch of what your cooperative efforts might look like. And as Sheldon will point out, we're going to lean very hard to a crawl, walk, run approach. You folks will decide exactly, how quickly you want to progress with this project and to what extent. So we're going to design this so that you have the option to do a little at a time, or you can move very quickly if that is your desire, based on the information that we have you, and I'll get some of that for you. Sheldon's going to speak, for the most part, to the future opportunities. These, like I said, are very rough drafts, but it'll give you an idea of some of what we think, or a direction that you folks may want to consider. Then eventually, I get to bring you a final presentation. I look forward to this because I'll probably get to come back and have wine again. So when this is completed, and it'll go through a couple of phases. The first one is what we call a technical review. Most of what we're doing over the next 2 days is to validate the information that we've gathered, to find out the holes that are in this document and areas, and we've identified several of them already just in the couple of days I've been working with your chief. We find out if there are areas that we need to improve in this document, and then we'll finish completing it. It then goes to what's called a technical review. I will send it to whomever I'm directed to send it to. Obviously, the chief will be one, and then some of the other folks in the area that are interested in the program. They will go through our document very carefully, and I speak this particularly to a couple of you that I understand have a finance background. But they'll go through the document and make sure that we haven't had any errors or omissions. Once the technical draft is approved, then of course we'll go ahead and it'll go to print, and then I come and will present it to anybody or group that would like to hear about it with our recommendations and the finality that goes with that. So that'll come with the final review at the end. As I said before, we set out and to start this project, and normally this is a difficult challenge. For Yamhill County, this was almost insurmountable. We asked for more information than you can imagine. Now just multiply that by 9 departments, and they all had to send it to us. And like I said, without a doubt, every time I called up and asked for another document, by that afternoon, I had that document. So you folks have put a great deal of effort into making sure that this project goes well. Just some of the examples, and here again, you don't need to go through all of this, but it just shows the volume of information that we have to get to this. Probably the most complicated of this report is on the financial side, and I'm going to show you some of that tonight. And then, of course, there's the GIS side. One of the benefits of our organization is we have the ability to take all of the data, all of the runs, the types, the EMS versus fire, the location, how long did it take to get there, and all these will be graphically represented on these maps that really actually tell the story better than I could ever write. And there's a lot of decisions that can be made based on those documents. I was showing your chief some of them earlier this afternoon, and it'll probably be one of the highlights of the project is that you get to graphically see where you stand right now. And then, of course, the financial side will help you look at the feasibility of this project and, any benefits or, issues that may arise. The team is pretty self-explanatory. I am your project manager. I work for Mr. Gilbert, who's in the back of the room, is going to talk to you momentarily. And then there are a couple of people that are just truly the best of their in the industry. Rodney Macchio is a chief out of Marion County. He did most of your mapping, most of your performance analysis. I do a little of that. But basically, a standard of cover is a report card. We kind of combine that with what we're doing right here, which is a consolidation study. So we try to show you what each entity is doing right now, good, bad, and indifferent, and I can honestly tell you that your organizations are doing very well. And then we apply that to how it would affect if you came together as a cooperative effort or as a combined entity. But that's Mr. Macchio's. Then Mr. McElhaney, he's got the lion's share of work here. I can tell you that I brought with me the current state of the finances for and the financial analysis for all 9 departments. I have broken those up into 9 different departments and sent them out to each one of the authorities that it's appropriate for. They will then have a period of time to go through those financial analysis and determine whether or not we missed anything or there's any errors. You folks are welcome to see any part of this. There's nothing confidential involved here. Eventually, we'll take that 45 or 50 page part of this report and it ends up in the appendice. Most people don't even have the capacity to understand or read. Mr. McElhenney, this is his specialty. And so it'll be in there in the back, so you folks will be able to reference all different parts of the financial status of each one of these departments. Then in the body of the document, we're going to come up with several proposals, some suggestions, some direction, and there are financial statements that correspond to everything that we suggest. So if we make a recommendation, you'll have the financials to support it. It'll be in the body. So for a couple of you, I'm just real excited because you'll actually read this work. And there's certainly a lot of it. Some people will probably just be happy not to ever open up the appendice and move on with just the service delivery side of this. So there's your team, and we've been working for, well, it's been close to 3 months right now. Like I said, we're at least a 70 or 80 percentile in getting finished. The baseline evaluations, these are just small excerpts, folks, and so all I did is reach into the report, grab a couple of graphics just to show them, but by no means is the totality of what we've accomplished. This shows some of the corresponding relationships, which are quite unique, by the way. The bottom graph showing you that blue would be EMS, and throughout the country, EMS is the predominant type of call that we run. In your case, several of your agencies actually run almost as many fires as they do EMS. So these are the kind of graphics, and then of course there's narrative that goes with it in our, an opinion, to help you analyze what you might do with the system from, a more global perspective, for the lack of words. So you'll see a lot of this. It will cover every one of the 9 departments, and we'll break out some of the performance and what each department does. This particular one is looking at it as a whole, but when you look at the document, it'll of course show you what each department is doing.
Rich?
Yes, sir.
And maybe this next slide will help, but could you go very quickly over the departments that we're looking at for those that can't decipher what the initials are?
Oh, no problem. And in the document, it's of course very easy to see. It's a little harder to do on this, but it's basically the 9 departments that you folks are in discussion with to discuss a consolidation. Is that what you're referring to?
Right. I just want to make sure all the counselors are aware of who we're in with.
So starting on the far left, Amity being the AFD, Dundee Fire Department, then there's Dayton Fire Department, Lafayette, one that you've probably heard of, McMinnville, New Carlton, am I saying that correctly? New Carlton Fire Department, Sheridan Fire Department, and West Valley.
Thank you, Rich.
Of course, and I appreciate if you interrupt and ask me questions, it gives me a chance to take a breath. This is just a jurisdictional map, but like I said, I was showing the chief earlier, we have most of the GIS, which is remarkable technology. It basically, we take your area, which is what you see up there. These programs plot every call that has occurred within this area. It measures every road, every speed limit, every roundabout. It looks at how quickly the ambulances or the engines or trucks got to a particular event. They also are able to calculate the manpower that showed up at each one of these events. Did you have an effective response force, we call it. All of this kind of information is going to be in that document. And then it'll translate all the way over to some of your ISO documents. We provide those to you as a service so that when it comes time to, update your ISO ratings, it shows, do you have water supply? It shows your response distances for your engines and your trucks. So there's a lot of this document that will become a living document, and you'll use it throughout the next couple of years, regardless of what you do on the consolidation side. So this, I think, is going to be a useful tool for all of these jurisdictions on many different levels. Then the financials. Like I said, I have a background in finance and I can barely read this stuff. So I'm looking forward to you folks looking through it. As I said, I think there's 45 or 50 pages of just the current state of finances for each department. Of course, this is just a snapshot slide for Amity. But when it comes time, I encourage you to look through there. And as I said, I've already handed off to each entity their particular financials. So if you'd like to see any part of McMinnville, I would certainly be happy to send it to anybody that's in the room just to look at. And they're just the summaries. They're about 4 or 5 pages for each department summarizing, their current state for financial.
Yeah, I'd like to look at that when you get a chance.
I've heard rumor of that, so I will see to it that you do. Now, something that we're going to do that we just decided, well, I think it was the chief and I talking yesterday, you folks are already into your next approved budget cycles. So we really ought to base our recommendations on 2021 and 2022, and so we are. So we're going to take, and I've talked to Mr. McElhenney, he's going to run the projections for all of the options that we give you based on your brand new budgets that you just ratified. So I think it'll help you make a very clean decision about what you're going to do when you move forward here. So we're going to add to this. Normally we would have just done it as a snapshot in time as of last year's budget. I think we're going to do a better job. So you're going to see it as current as it possibly could. And I think as of right now, the chief has been able to get 5 of the department's current or new budgets. So by tomorrow, we'll probably have the rest and we'll move forward with that project.
Rich, going back to that slide one more time, as we look at Amity, we're looking at reoccurring revenue. Would that be revenue that's coming from taxes? And non-reoccurring, could that be revenue that comes from recouping costs? Could you give the definition of reoccurring and non-reoccurring revenue?
Actually, sir, you've hit it 100%. So, you obviously have non-reoccurring revenues that come into an entity, whether it has been everything from a grant cycle all the way down to a levy that you placed for that particular year. So you're absolutely right. This is going to be your permanent taxation, and then what they have over the past few years got that is non-reoccurring. So I think your definition is accurate.
Thank you.
Then we're going to spend a lot of time. One of the, there's many components that go into the consideration of a consolidation or cooperative efforts. Finances, of course, is extremely important, and it has to be accounted for. Service delivery is one of the most critical factors. In the end, we all answer to the public. So the section in there on service delivery measures each one of these departments and just looks at the service they're providing. How quickly do they get to your house? What is the efficacy of the care that they're providing? So that's service delivery. Then we look at this part here. There's an entire section on staffing. How are you going to staff the future of this potential combined department? We have not only the current state of what we have. Oh, and I'm sorry, I got to look up the thing. I'm looking at stations here. I'll move forward just to make it easy. So the staffing side of this basically measures where you are right now, but based on the service delivery, we then are able to determine, we might need to staff a station up north. That's where the volume of calls is occurring, and you folks may want to consider such an event. Those were showing up on the maps that I was presenting to the fire chief today. There are some interesting considerations that are going to need to be made in the future based on what we were able to find, and it will affect this staffing. So this particular slide just shows currently what is the minimum staffing right now. If you dialed 911, and these are the folks coming. I'm also going to show you what these folks have been able to accomplish over the past few years. They do a very good job, but I think there are some of those stations that probably need to think about future career staffing as you move down the road, but we don't want to get ahead of it. Jumping back a slide, we also evaluate every one of your facilities. We're going to look at the stations, find out from a service delivery capacity, and I keep using that word. Our goal is to figure out whether a station is able to provide the resources and manpower to provide those kind of calls in that area. So we'll evaluate all of your stations. As a matter of fact, that is completed now. make some suggestions that you might want to consider renovating this station to have the capacity to have 24-hour paid crews in that house, or that this station maybe isn't as efficient and maybe you should consider relocating. This does not turn into a station relocation study, but we give you some suggestions that at least a conversation should be made, that here's some areas that you could probably improve, and we found some of those today. So we'll go through and give you a detailed report of each one of your stations in this potential, because of course stations translates to money. Anytime you have to deal with capital, there's always a capital expenditure. So we're going to help guide you a little bit to give you an idea. But I think truly looking at this kind of stuff, you folks actually have great resources. There are some changes that you could make that would probably make it more efficient. But as a whole, this is a very strong organization as a whole with these 9 departments. Then we're going to get into the survey. This is important, and I applaud you folks for participating in this. These are your constituents, or your firefighters. These folks are the ones that were basically polled. They were asked a series of questions. It shows you this one here just talks about the percentage of response that they got from each department. But we're basically going to be able to go through and show you what the people that actually do this job, how they feel about the potential of a consolidation. I will tell you that without getting in, because tonight is not the purpose to make a presentation, but they're very positive about the potential of coming together on several different levels. Now, some of it want a little bit less now and more later. Some want to, consolidate very quickly. But rarely do I get to go into an organization or an area this large with this many entities that this many people are enthusiastic for the process. So I think that is a sign that this has a great deal of potential and could be very successful. But again, like I said, we'll present, there's probably 8 or 9 pages of just talking about what their opinion was, and their opinion counts. Obviously, they're the ones doing the job, and they're doing a very good job, I might add. This is the schedule. And I also, because of another obligation I have next week, I'm staying. So I'm going to stay for a couple of extra days, and I would put myself out there that if anybody wanted to have additional conversation, I would welcome it. We have a long list of people. Some of you are in this list. And so what we're going to try to do is to get a very broad perspective based on the document we have right now to make sure we're doing this right. We haven't missed anything. A lot of these folks might turn around and be, you're on the wrong track. We need to change direction a little bit. I've had entire reports that we had to go back and, redo 50% of it, and we welcome that because it meant that we got back on track of where this needed to be. So these folks in here for the next 3 days will sit down with us with every section of what we've accomplished so far and guide us to make sure that we're doing it right. Make sure that we have the facts straight. And then a lot of these people need to be heard. We want to make sure that the majority of people have a voice here. And we're going to let everybody speak that we possibly can see. And by all means, like I said, if there's a chance that I could meet one of you, as long as you're buying the coffee, I'm willing to meet. So let me know and we'll work something out. Then the overall purpose of this report. In the end, you want us to take all of this information, financial, capital, staffing, performance, everything. You want us to put this together and potentially make a recommendation for whether you should or how you should possibly do a cooperative effort and in what phases. The true expert in this area is Sheldon. So I think what I'm going to do is step out of the way for a minute, let him address some of the future opportunities, but I want to emphasize the conclusions haven't been drawn. This is simply kind of where we are right now, and then I've got a series of questions to ask of you folks towards the end of it, because like I said, this is more important that I hear from you than you hear from me. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Sheldon real quick and discuss this part of it. It's slow.
Okay. Mayor and honorable council members, it's an honor for me to be here. Thank you for having us. And just a little bit about, and this particular instance, I do have the privilege of being the CEO of ESCI, but I'm working for Rich on this project. And one of the reasons I'm doing that is because I really believe in regional cooperation and cooperative service type approaches to fire protection. Just a very little bit about myself, just so you can kind of understand where I came from. I had about a 29-and-a-half-year career in Alameda County, California, which is on the East Bay side of the San Francisco Bay Bridge. And I started working for a combination part-paid fire department with 17 personnel that served about 15,000 personnel. When I retired out of the fire department, I was fire chief, and we served, we were a fire district that went through 6 consolidations for districts, contracted for service with 5 municipal cities and 2 national laboratories, one of them a national nuclear weapons laboratory, Lawrence Livermore Lab in California. And I say that only to say that I understand the nature and the complexities of these types of studies and these types of endeavors. And there are some basic truths to any sort of regional cooperation that I will share with you, and then talk about how we are kind of looking at what you're doing and what you could potentially do moving forward. First of all, you're to be commended for taking on this study. This takes a lot of willingness to put yourselves out there. Whoops, I don't know what I did. I think I just hit that. And being able to let some strangers come in from out of town and dig through your closets. But it's really, really important. When you talk about regional fire protection, it's kind of like planetary alignment. It's when the policymakers and the communities and the boots on the ground and the fire chiefs and the administrative chiefs all agree that, yeah, it's time for us to do something, that it happens. I can tell you some basic truths. Number one, it usually takes 2 to 3 phased-in attempts to get to a truly integrated fire protection model. Number 2, it usually takes longer than you think. Truth number 3 is the items that you will always get bogged down on are administration, local control, cost containment, cost apportionment, and how you're going to do those things. And then truth number 4, when you get down to over all those administrative and policy level decisions, the boots on the ground need to be able to implement this and work as a unit. But there are efficiencies to be made. There are enhancements to service levels that can be realized. And you certainly have done a lot of work through these 9 departments already to move that direction. And so what we have framed out is really 4 different options that are kind of a phased approach to a fully integrated consolidated fire protection model. You could stop at any one of these, you could skip over any one of these, or you could go right to the end if that is something you wanted to do. I will tell you another truth is sometimes if you go too fast and you go too aggressively, you can tip it over and it can be a very unfortunate and unpleasant experience. And so we always like to give you steps you can take and thresholds you can achieve that will help you be sustainable and successful as you move forward. You can maintain the status quo. You are doing a lot of great work at different levels, from training to dispatch to full operational integration, administrative integration, medical direction, physicals. All sorts of different things are happening amongst the 9 agencies in different ways. If you did nothing more, I think you would miss some potential opportunities, but you definitely could do that. Phase 1, as we kind of see it, is you can take a lot of the things that are happening and continue them across the spectrum of the 9 organizations who are participating in this study. So in Oregon, you have a statute that is Oregon revised statute 190.007 that is a very permissive and robust statute that allows you to contract for services between cities and districts and counties and other segments of government. You can continue to expand those IGA type concepts and do things the same. Like you've got 2 or 3 things going for dispatch. You've got 2 or 3 things going for some of your EMS coverage. You've got 2 or 3 things going for fire prevention and emergency management. You could work towards making those agreements synonymous and consistent and expand those and begin to work. Even though you have different administrative governing agencies, you can start to work together under all of those things. And so we're going to provide you some steps and some visuals and some costs and some approaches to expanding those existing intergovernmental agreements. If you do that, either partially or in whole, and you decide that, wow, this is a really good fit and we want to start acting like one regional provider, there's an interim step before legal integration where you can still maintain the district, the autonomy of the districts and the city councils and the government oversight agencies for the purposes of taxation, for the purposes of authority and spending, and how you're going to do this. And that's by doing an operational unification through establishment of a contract for service, or what we've called in the state of Oregon a regional fire authority. And essentially what you're doing here is after you've kind of taken those intergovernmental agreements, we're doing dispatch the same, and we're doing medical direction the same, and we're doing our automatic and mutual aid the same, and we're doing our training the same. Now we can pick a hosting agency, and we haven't specified who that would be, but you can pick a hosting agency that would be the owner of the employees, but all the jurisdictions would contract through this one entity, forming what we would call a regional fire authority. And each autonomous agency, district, or city would maintain their taxing authority, and in some cases the authority and the ownership of their stations and their apparatus, but you'd be running as one entity. This is what we did in my organization. We were a fire district that contracted for service with 5 municipal cities, some of them large. We served a population of over 400,000. And what we did in those particular entities is they contracted for that service through us. We owned the employees, we managed their resources, but they kept ownership of their stations and their apparatus, so should they ever choose not to contract for service, they could go back in business relatively quickly. So that's just one example of a regional fire authority approach. And then under Oregon law, there is a provision for multiple ways to have what we would call a legal integration. And a legal integration is where all these jurisdictions would become a new jurisdiction. And it would happen through one of 3 or a combination of 3 things. One of the things you can do is you can merge everybody into one existing fire district, for instance. You could take one of the fire districts and then reallocate the boundaries through vote of the people. This would include a vote of the people and a number of legal steps that would have to be taken under Oregon law that would then lay this district over the rest of the service area, and you'd all become one district through a merger into an existing district. Annexation would occur in that districts would now overlay the city municipalities, so that for purposes of fire protection and EMS services, that would be covered through this district. Another way to do it is if you didn't want to use an existing district as that merger vehicle, you could simply say, we're going to dissolve all the districts and we're going to annex over the municipalities and we're going to create a new fire district. And that would be a true consolidated legal integration where you can do that. Once again, that involves forming this district and having the votes of all the jurisdictions to approve that, having taxation and operational authority over that whole area, and essentially the existing districts and the municipalities would be out of the fire protection business, but be a part of and served by this new district. So there are different, and this is like, anytime you talk about cooperative service initiatives, if you've seen one system, you've seen one system. No 2 are the same, and that's for a reason. You got to where you are for a reason. You're doing a lot of great things, but you can take it to these more unified approaches where you will see some efficiencies, you will see some economies of scale, you will see some enhanced service capabilities, and you probably will see some enhanced response and outcomes to the communities that you serve. So we're kind of presenting this, at least initially framing it, and over the next 2 days we're going to talk to everybody, and you may send us out of here saying, well, nix that one, or we're going straight to that one, or have you thought about a 4th one? And we can certainly do that. But this is what we've initially framed out to come talk to all of the powers to be about. How would you like to go about doing this? I have found that the crawl, walk, run approach tends to set you up for building relationships, building economic and operationally sustainable systems, and allows you to ease your way into that legal integration if that's what you choose to do. In my particular county case, all of the districts did legal integration, but the cities maintained the contract for service. So there can be a mix and a match too. So there's just different ways to go about it, but that's the phases that we've laid out that we're going to be talking to you about over the next 2 days and get into the details and into the weeds of how that might look. So I'm going to stop and allow you to ask me some questions, and I will be happy to answer them if I at all can.
Okay, we'll open it up for counselors to ask any questions. And I can't see all of you, so just identify who you are and go ahead and ask the questions if you have them.
When you're going back to the,
Okay, Remy?
sorry, when you're going back and looking at the costs of these different options, can you speak to kind of cost per?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the first thing that we're going to do. If there's a desire to take a look at some different ways of operating as a unified fire service or fire system, we're going to cost it out and say, this is what, given what you have and given what you will be, this is what you need as an organization. And then based on all the costing information that we have, we're probably going to take an average or pick a median or pick a spot, because not everybody's paid the same, not everybody's benefited the same, but we got to pick a spot. So we usually come to the middle, to the average and the median, and we're going to cost out this new organization. And then what we're going to do, how you pay for your portion of that organization are going to vary under a contract for service regional fire authority versus a legally integrated fire district. And let me tell you what that might look like. So the cost might be the same. I'm just going to throw out a number. This is completely out of thin air, not related to anything, so please don't take this number. Let's just say it's going to be a $15 million system a year, all right? We then need to decide how much is McMinnville going to pay for that $15 million, and how much of the district's going to pay for that $15 million under a contract for service. You're going to see a very extensive analysis on the different ways that we can allocate costs. We can allocate costs on what we would call a multiple variable system, meaning we can weight your risk, we can weight the service delivery, we can weight your population, we can weight the assessed value of your community. There's a lot of different things we can put into a formula that ultimately is going to say, based on this formula of multiple variables, McMinnville is going to pay this percentage of that $15 million, Yamhill's going to pay this percentage of that $15 million, so on and so forth. So that is how we would do it for the contract service regional fire authority. If we wanted to do a legally integrated consolidated fire district, we would take that $15 million and in most cases take a look at the AV and the tax rate, and we would determine a mill rate for what it would take to fund that fire department, and everybody within the district would pay that portion. Okay? And so there are two different costing strategies when you look at an integrated district versus a contract for service regional fire authority. The other thing that could come out of this is a combination, like I just told you I experienced in my past life. You may have the districts legally integrate and figure out what their mill rate's going to be, and a contractual cost for cities to participate under that, but they would still maintain ownership of things. I mean, that's another option. And under a contract and a cost allocation strategy, you would pay your fair share. So there's a lot of different ways to dice it up. We would also look for opportunities to reduce redundancy, which can decrease costs. I can tell you, in my personal experience, over the course of 12 to 15 years of the consolidation, we eliminated, through attrition, over 18 chief officer positions that were redundant. Now, you don't have that kind of redundancy here, I'm telling you up front. But I'm just saying, we would determine what we need for staff for this new regional model, and if there is redundancy, we can eliminate that through attrition. We would recommend. You only get to have people who walk the street and sell suits one time, and nobody ever wants to consolidate with you again. So you try to do this in such a way where people can grow in or downsize and right-size into the new model. But there could be some savings there. We also see first-time, one-time savings. When you're buying fire engines together versus buying fire engines apart, there's economies of scale. Same with supplies, same with services. So it's not uncommon to see a one-time 8 to 10% savings if you're doing everything together and you're getting economies of scale. Another example, when we were buying one fire engine versus when we were buying 6 fire engines at a time, we saved between $25,000 and $30,000 per fire. It makes sense. So that's the kind of savings you can potentially see depending on what you're buying and what your volume is. So I don't know if that adequately answers your question, but let me know.
Sheldon, another question that I might have is, as we look at different fire districts that we're looking at the 9, there are many that are volunteer, and there are some that have a paid staff. How do you compare volunteer and the cost to those that are have a true cost of paid fire department? And then secondly, on that, how do you, as you're bringing that together, make sure that you have the participation of the volunteers in a certain area? If they fall out, then the whole district's going to be penalized by not having adequate staff to do what they need to do.
Yes. This in no way, shape, or form should be viewed as a mechanism to reduce even or eliminate any volunteerism that's occurring within the participating districts. This is going to be what we would call a combination strategy, meaning you're going to have paid staff and you're going to have volunteer staff. Now, the cost of the district is the cost of the district, and that when we put together that cost allocation formula and strategy, we would need to determine what value the volunteer districts are getting from the paid staff and what portion they should pay. You're also going to see full-time paid staff probably working to enhance volunteer recruitment and retention strategies for all of the jurisdictions that are using volunteers, because that is a growing problem nationwide as volunteerism drops off, because of some of it's cultural, but a lot of it's because we no longer work in town at the mill in some cases and can drop whatever we're doing and go respond to a call. So it's going to be accounted for, but it will not be eliminated. And the hope would be that your new integrated service delivery model will support that volunteer cadre better with training, with recruitment, with retention, with possible ability to keep, let them, be more appealing for them to be a part of this larger new organization. And then in some cases, you'll have to augment them with paid staff if they're not showing up or not able to show up to meet the call demand. That seems to be a common problem, especially during the day in a lot of communities.
Okay. Other questions from counselors? Again, just go ahead and speak up. I can only see a couple of you. Remy, I see your hand again.
I'll go if nobody else has a question.
Go ahead, Adam, Dan.
Yeah, I was just curious, the downsides or the positives from going just from straight phase 1 to phase 3, or if you really recommend that we hang out in phase 2 for a year or two.
Yeah, I do recommend a phase 2 of some sort. It may not be across the board. Phase 2 in some cases is already happening amongst 2 or 3 agencies. But I think what phase 2 allows you to do, first of all, to do the legal integration, and we're going to give you a full strategy on the things you need to do to put your policy committees together, to put your operational committees together, your training, your EMS. There's a series of things that need to happen, and you also obviously need to engage your communities. So this isn't something that happens overnight. The contract for service regional fire authority can happen relatively quickly, especially because you're doing so much of it. And so I would recommend that you use phase 2 as an opportunity not only to do some contract stuff to bring things together and start looking the same, but simultaneously you're putting your consolidation and your integration committees together to start drawing up your legal folks, your communication folks, your budgetary folks, so you can start drawing up what needs to happen and what needs to be filed with Secretary of State and other folks to start looking at this legal integration and all of the elections that are going to take place. Because you're going to deal with 9 elections to make legal integration happen of some sort. And so that's a big deal, and that takes time. So if you can continue to move through, it also helps you when you run those elections to be able to demonstrate to the communities that we're doing this as a fire authority, and here are the benefits. Here's how those benefits can be even enhanced and more seamless if we do a legal integration. So I do recommend you park at phase 2, but don't park at phase 2. Do phase 2 while you're simultaneously moving to phase 3 if that's your ultimate.
Other questions,
Thank
Adam?
you. No, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay. Remy, did you have a question? Go ahead.
When we, as these conversations are moving forward, what do we hear from our fire teams about the direction they'd like to see us moving?
So I'm going to defer to Richard on that. We have some survey information. Part of the reason we're here is to talk to a lot of these folks. But if Chief or any other folks want to speak to that, I think I've heard there's a lot of that.
And I think, and forgive me if I had this slide in omission, but I think I can show it to you. There. This is just one slide or one summary of the results of that survey. It covered a great many questions, but this particular one was just their opinion on a potential consolidation, and you had 78% are in favor. Now, there's always those, I like that part about depending on the configuration. Obviously, they have an opinion on how they would like to see this ultimate organization look like. But I've never seen that positive of a survey before in any consolidation that I've ever been involved with or potential. So
How many people was the survey sent to?
and I'm just doing really bad math there, but 28, 38, 40, about 150 people.
Yeah, at the top it says 100.
Yeah, it says 150 responses, so it was sent to, or 151 responses, but I guess my question is, did everybody respond?
No, and you saw that, I showed a slide earlier that showed the percentages of each department that submitted back responses. And
Yeah, I don't remember the numbers. Sorry, I've been having screen problems for about a week and a half, so it's all a little blurry, so I apologize if I'm missing
No, I
things.
understand. But the reality is we got a great response. People don't like surveys. But combined with what you see on the screen right now to what we do over the next 2 days, we're going to get very close to a lot of people who are going to be able to voice their opinion. And that also ends up in this document when we're done. So what we lack here in just the usual surveys, we're going to get a lot more information over the next 2 days and get some more opinion. But I think it's going to mirror this 80% that you see up here.
Okay.
Other questions?
I think I saw Zach had his hand raised earlier. I don't want to cut in front of him.
Okay. Zach?
Okay. I guess I thought you talked about the mill rate earlier, getting to the mill rate. I kind of thought we were going to see something along the lines of that in this. How long until we're able to see some more financial feasibility models of moving forward to understand that? And then I understand the caveats about this is always going to move slower than you think, but I've never done this. I don't think anyone in this room has never done this because we're not in a big district like this. Your professional opinion would be very valuable in, it's a 3-year endeavor, it's a 30-year endeavor, just hazarding guesses at how, frame of reference for how long it would take to move forward.
The really professional answer would be, and Sheldon can certainly expand on it, is I don't know. It depends a great deal on you folks. It's going to be all these individual departments and their level of comfort, their temperature to this process. So in answer to your question, we're going to have a great deal of this information for you. It's too early to hand it to you now. I still need a couple of days to validate what we've done to make sure that I have not made errors. But once we get that, you're probably, and I want to say this conservatively, we'll probably have this to a technical draft within the next 30 days. Or at least that's my goal. It'll probably be somewhere within that range. And at that point, you'll have very specific data and very specific financial. But as far as the process goes, there are 9 departments up there. It's going to kind of depend on what is their desire and their opinion of this. We'll simply give you the path to follow if you want to follow it.
I can tell you this. If y'all decide that you want to move to a phase 2 regional fire authority model, you can make a lot of progress over a 1-year budget cycle to get into the next year's budget cycle and make things happen. If you want to get into a fully integrated new district or merged district, you probably need to add realistically 2 years to that. You're probably 3 years out from putting on the new t-shirt.
I appreciate that professional opinion on that. And then, so just confirming what I heard you say, we're within 30 days, we'll have more information on that millage rate and those overall costs as you're able to pull those together. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And right now we have the summaries of each of the 9 departments, their current state through 2020. They're, and those are actually out there. I can certainly provide you with any of that information. But the one thing I want to caution is I need to first make sure that it's accurate. So that's why we're disseminating it to all the entities. They will then get it back to me, I'm hoping in a reasonable amount of time. Then our accountant will take that, consolidate that into the final report. And I think somewhere 30 to 45 days, I think you guys are going to have a finished document.
Excellent. Forgive me, this is an elementary question, but okay, so moving to phase two, if we all say, yeah, phase two, let's move forward on that, and we can look at your figure 18 where 118 out of 151 responses said, oh yeah, we favor that. I get that might not be crazy to think that that's where we should all be moving. How, if we say we're comfortable moving to phase two, what does the process look like for getting all of those other districts, Amity, Dundee, Dayton, Lafayette, Carleton, Sheridan, West Valley, taking their pulse? And how does it work if we're going to take the next step forward? Do we wait until everyone else takes the next step forward? How does that work? I don't fully, could you talk me through that?
I sure can. So one of the things that we encourage you to do is a strategic visioning with the policymakers right up front. Because what has happened many, many times is we get in the weeds operationally and we start putting all these great plans together, and then we find out in the 11th hour there's no political will to happen. If you all don't want this to happen across the board with all the district boards, it's not going to happen. So we're going to encourage you to put together a policymaker visioning process very quickly to determine who's in and who's not, and get that established. And then based on that, move towards your phase two and your phase three, where you'll put your operations chiefs and your prevention chiefs and all of your different folks together in their committees to work on the substance. But what has happened more times than I care to mention is we get a lot of great work done from the fire chiefs level down, and then we get it to the policymakers and there's not the will there to do it. So that's what we're going to recommend you do, is you get together with the 9 boards or however many boards there are, or councils, and have a facilitated process that says, this is phase 2, this is phase 3. What would that look like?
And Sheldon, can I just ask Chief if, I know he's been doing some of that, so there's been some of that legwork, especially with Amity and with Lafayette and with Dundee, if I'm not mistaken. So Chief, could you address that? Because I think we've done some of that work a bit.
Yeah, apparently you've done some visioning with the stakeholders. So you want to do it maybe?
Certainly. Mr. Mayor, 2 points to the earlier question. The part that Sheldon and the phase 5 of our contract, which we have budgeted for this year, would be some of that startup dialogue with the elected bodies to help deal with that process. Once we had the plan in place and we were ready to start looking at options and having that dialogue, that is phase 5 that the council bought off on the contract when we entered into the contract with ESCI. But it wouldn't occur until this fiscal year, so we had it in this year's budget. So that part of the dialogue is planned for and budgeted for. And I'm sorry I missed the question. I was sidebarring off the.
Well, again, I just want to, ask from a perspective. I know that you have talked to some of the city councils, you have talked to some of the boards for those that are already fire districts, and had some positive response is my understanding. So it's not like we're going into this without having support of many of those districts, if I'm not mistaken. So could you address that possibly?
That's accurate, Mr. Mayor. I cannot say that we have 9 districts ready to jump into a full-blown contract with us. But given that doesn't mean that we couldn't phase in the process to accommodate these districts only want a contract. These districts are ready to move forward in something different with like a fire authority or moving on to the next level. Does that make sense?
It does. Zach, I'm sorry I put it in, but I thought that would give us some texture to where we've been. Go ahead, Zach.
That helps. I guess I still am trying to figure out, so like, is McMinnville leading this discussion, and does the McMinnville City Council then goes to the Amity City Council and then comes back, and then goes to the Dundee City Council and then comes back and then goes, or do we put one person on a committee with one person from all of those places and we all talk? Or I guess just really nuts and bolts. I'm trying to, in my head, put that roadmap of how the conversations, I get what you're saying, and I totally am 100% on board. Let's not put together the structure and then have it be torpedoed at the end by the policymakers. I get it, but how do we have that policy discussion in the big circle?
So there's no right answer. In other words, it's what's going to work for the elected bodies here. Let me give you an example that I did with Forest Grove and all of the districts around them where we did a very similar thing. And they decided to have 2 members of each board or 2 members from each city council involved to come together and have the discussion and then take it back to their board for action or their council for action. That way we don't have, 72 people in the room trying to figure out what's next. So that's just one way to do it. I facilitated a workshop with them. They came to consensus relatively quickly, and I believe they're on the verge of moving to their fire authority, but that was in 2015. So if you want to know a time frame, here we are, right? So it's I would recommend a couple representatives from each board or council come together, put the footprint together, put the framework together, take it back and present it to the individual councils through the city managers and or the district directors, and then see if we can get buy-off on that, and then that becomes the roadmap moving forward.
Thanks for walking me through that. That's super helpful. That was what I was after. Sal, back to you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Zach and Mr. Mayor. So I really appreciate the work that you put into this. I was a little late jumping into the meeting, and so you may have covered a couple of questions that I have. One thing that I'm really concerned about is that as part of this process, we address the current staffing level issue that I perceive we have in the city of McMinnville. And one fear that I've had about going to districting is that the amount of time that it's going to take for us to move through that process is going to be longer than I would prefer to address what I think is an immediate staffing need. And I guess I would just ask that you take that into consideration in the next 30 days as you're working on your plan, that we, at least several people on the council, several community members believe that there's a current staffing issue that needs to be addressed as part of this process that needs to happen very early in the process, at least to make me feel comfortable with it. A second related problem that I just want to flag for your attention is that one of the reasons we've been sold on this idea of redistricting is the idea that it would result in cost savings and reducing the current drain on our city's general fund. And one of the concerns that I have about the kind of the nearer term contract model that we might be looking into is that I don't believe that the current contract that we have, for example, with the rural fire district, that we're fully recouping the cost of providing that service. So the funds, when we don't recoup that cost to the rural fire district, come out of our city's general fund. And of course, the rural fire district is not part of our city's tax base. So I definitely wouldn't want to get us into a situation with these contracts where we are continuing to hemorrhage money out of the general fund to cover somebody else's service district. That would be a big red flag for me. And so I guess one question that I have is, have any of the models that you've looked at in terms of allocation of resources through these contracts, are you using models that actually can protect the general fund or the budget of the entity that's providing the service?
If I understand what you're asking, and it's a very valid question, let me address the first one that you addressed as far as some of the immediate issues within the area. And I apologize, I'm trying to look at your picture, but the camera's over here, so if I'm not...
Yeah, I don't have a picture up there, so it's okay.
The first one is concurrency of issues. Every city or municipality or district has current events going on right now that can't just be put on the back burner because you're talking about, a consolidation effort or, some kind of opportunity for combining. So as a result of that, those still take place. We have addressed a number of things that I think are going to be worth your discussion as far as some immediate staffing things to go along with the city. The one emphasis we would like to place on it is that you take a global perspective at the possibility that maybe there is a good reason to delay 6 months doing a staffing change, because in the bigger picture, it would have more efficacy if you looked at it from a broader perspective. We're going to address some of that for you. So in answer to your question, yes, some things have to be dealt with today because they're an immediate event, whether it's a staffing for your medics, or 4-person staffing on an engine. Sometimes these have to be addressed immediately. We're just going to try to put that in a global perspective. But yes, we're going to address both. Does that answer that first part of it?
Yes, thank you.
You cannot put them all on hold just because you're in a consolidation discussion.
On part B, one of the most important things we will do on the contract for service model is we're going to give you multiple variable models, and we'll actually have a calculator that you can mess with it. You can change variable models based on weighting of population, service delivery, risk, assessed value, to get to the right answer as to what is fair and equitable for the jurisdictions. You can't just say one size fits all. You got to look at the different variables and what's going on within the community, what your global regional risk profile look like, and make sure everybody's paying their fair share. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a model, a costing model that A, you think is fair, and B, isn't giving you greater efficiency and or greater effectiveness, then yeah, that would not be a good deal to sign. So yeah, you should be able to see multiple models, and we will run those out for you. And we actually have an automated calculator where we can mess with stuff, and then we can say, okay, if you weigh your risk this much, it gets you this result. So if you weigh your population, it gets this result. Because no one thing is fair and equitable. You have to look at all the different elements of the communities who are participating. And we'll have it by community, so you'll be able to see what everybody's paying and what your costs do in relation to where you're at now, up or down.
And by the way, on that note, especially for the couple of you folks that have a strong finance background, I have that calculator with me, that program, and I could demonstrate, as we're using with an organization in Texas. They're kind of going through it, trying to figure out how to fairly allocate funding between what they call an ESD and the city of. So consequently, I could show you some of that if you just wanted to see how we come up with some of that. But it's tangible in the end, because obviously everybody's got to feel like they're being fairly represented. So I'm sorry, ma'am.
I would like to see.
I would love to meet you, and you know the criteria for it. As long as you're buying the coffee, I'm sitting down with you. So if you would help me out and speak with your good chief, he can help facilitate us getting together. But I'd be happy, and you could just plug in the numbers and hypothetical and see how they're affected, and you'll get a better idea of how we do cost allocation studies. And in the end, I think they're very fair. I think people at least have something more than just an emotional attachment that we're going to charge you 13% because we like the number 13. This way it actually says this is how we're measuring it, and it's fair across the board to all of the entities. I'd be happy to show it to you.
Thank you. Happy to listen.
Okay, back to you, Sal.
That was it, Mayor. I do appreciate the response on the last question. I guess I just reiterate my markers are on, the approach that helps us to address the staffing need, and the approach that protects the city's budget relative to the contracts with the jurisdictions that we're contracting with. So I just want to make sure folks know where I'm at on that. So thank you for that. By the way, it was very informative.
And thank you for the question, Sal, because I think we're all concerned about that as we're moving forward. As we listen, it is a phased process, and I think in the discussions we've had up to this point, we haven't understand that phased approach, and so I think it's giving us quite a bit of clarity. So I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to go around the horn again and just see if any have additional questions. So Kelly, I think I'll go to you first. Any questions that you might have?
Well, not off the top of my head. I am very interested in how this is going to work for us financially. So,
absolutely. Remy, any additional questions? Okay. Adam, any additional questions that you might have?
Did you say me, Mayor?
Yeah. Anything?
Yeah, my additional question would be, in your report, you mentioned that we have strong organization structure for the 9 people in the study. So I don't know if there's a way to break the report when it comes out in the next 30 to 45 days, how strong we are if it's only 3 of us coming to the initial district, or 5 of us, or 7 of us, and kind of what, if there's a calculator matrix that we're going to be able to plug in different partners to kind of see what our strengths are, or where we would be as far as what the district would look like and how strong it would be if certain partners came and certain didn't.
I think I understand what you're asking. You're basically wanting to know what the benefit of if 4 of the 9 departments came together, what that would look like compared to if we had 8 of the 9 departments coming together. Am I paraphrasing that correctly?
You are, and the ability to interchange like who those partners are to kind of know where we're at financially and you know, everything involved in apparatus age, staffing, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And so to answer that question, I think what we will do for you that you'll appreciate is we've evaluated all 9 departments in all those different categories: finance, capital, staffing. What we're going to do in there is lay them all on the table, and then you'll be able to move them back and forth to determine this is a liability I'm not sure we want to take on. This, you know, their collection or their, you know, amount of government funding or public funding, I mean, isn't sufficient to support this. You'll be able to put them side by side and look at them from the perspective of totality. So we will basically make a couple of recommendations, but the participation is going to be kind of laid out all on the table. And then that committee that Sheldon talked about is probably going to be tasked with looking at what would the group look like and what combination of that works best. I can tell you that what little I have, and by the way, this is a 30,000-foot view, there is certainly no one I would omit. I don't think anybody is a liability. The financial statements that we send out to everybody, there's not a glaring fact. There are on occasion, I have an issue I'm going to deal with in a California community up north, but quite honestly, I don't see any major issue where one entity is going to be a significant deficit to this overall project. So I think as a whole, it's going to come down to the individual organizations and how they feel about going forward with the process. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask,
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
If a group of 4 are solidly committed to moving on, and you protect according to Oregon state law, that would still be unsuccessful redistricting.
Absolutely. Folks, you might find out that this consolidation would look best with 4 departments. And then there might be 5 more that would be great in the future. And that doesn't mean you have to get rid of some of the cooperative efforts that you already have with those organizations. This can be a balance of both. You can have some that come under the authority immediately, and 4 more are just going to use the current arrangements or cooperative agreements that are in place. So you have a lot of flexibility here to see how this progresses. So not everybody has to jump on the bandwagon together.
And in past studies where we've had districts or participants who weren't in a position to successfully and sustainably be a part of what we were doing, we will create triggers or thresholds that if they achieve this and this and this and this and this, they then become a viable participant in this new model. So we may see some of that too. We are not there yet.
Any other questions, Adam?
No, for me, and thanks for the explanation. That was great.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move back to Zach. Any last questions you might have, Zach?
Yeah. First, Mr. Mayor, thank you for going head by head. That's a fun way to make sure we're getting all jumping in there. I have another. I guess I have two more questions, specifically of you, the consultants. I find the answers to question number 7 that you presented, as well as figures 2 and 3 in the presentation, particularly fascinating, in that we aren't alone in what we're worried about, and just we're all worried about it in different priorities. And if you 100% know this answer, then you could solve a lot more of our problems. But does districting, in your experience, since you guys go around and do this and see this, does districting have a viable shot at actually solving these problems long term?
And here again, you're asking for Rich's opinion at this moment, because I'd certainly like to finish the report before we do some kind of, validation with the facts. But it is 100% my opinion that this will benefit you. It'll not only benefit, as Sheldon was talking about, the economies of scale. I think your efficacy and your performance is going to increase, which means the service to your communities is going to increase. I think there's more opportunity for your firefighters. Obviously a larger organization can support a lot of different programs. I just think as a whole, the conclusion I cannot offer you, but I can tell you that I think it is very positive, and I think it would be in your best interest. Let me show you this next slide in answer to your question. These are most of the problems that were listed off by your firefighters. These are your folks talking. One of the things they were concerned about insufficient staffing, career and volunteer. This is a legitimate issue across the country, and these kind of consolidations or cooperative agreements are probably the defining way to solve this problem. Poor response time performance, absolutely. You do a hybrid version of whether or not you're putting some career mixed in with the volunteers to help improve your response. But to be perfectly honest, just having a response isn't enough. We need to have enough response to effectively mitigate a particular incident. We call it an effective response force. So I think your response times would dramatically improve with a consolidated effort, because now you're basically one entity. You can work it, you can be dynamic, you can use different kind of staffing models that support the areas. I'm going to show you these heat maps very soon and let you see where your call volume really is. I even surprised your chief a little bit. There are areas that have high call volume that just don't show up all the time with normal statistics. Deployment and station locations. I do think a couple of these stations are in the wrong place. All we're going to do is start a conversation that is, if you guys go long term, maybe there are ways you could more efficiently place these stations as a consolidated effort as compared to if everybody is on their own island. Islands don't tend to be sustainable. Lack of necessary funding, that's economies of scale, folks. I mean, these people, a little bit larger just gives you the ability to weather things like COVID, weather things like, economic downturns. It just gives you strength in numbers. And now I'm not saying you want to be, Dallas Fire Department, but on the same side, there is a little benefit, or not a little bit, there's a lot of benefit to having a stronger organization. Insufficient training, I think, is huge. I've divided my career evenly. I spent the first 17 years in basically a very rural, we were a volunteer, eventually evolved into a career department, but we had 3,000 square miles, and like I said, to be able to get resources to train people up there was extremely hard to do. Now I work with a very large metropolitan department, and resources are plentiful. We can always get, all the training equipment and supplies that we want. You combine, that means everybody gets to benefit from that. That is one of those things, and Sheldon mentioned this, and I just want to reiterate it. Your volunteers are absolutely beyond comprehension critical to this organization. You are never, well, I shouldn't say never, but it is far beyond my lifespan going to not have volunteers here. They're essential. The key to that is to support them, all right? I was a volunteer for a very long time, and some of the misconceptions is that a paid department, a combination department, can dramatically improve the ability, the lifestyle, and the commitment that a volunteer can give. So it definitely can complement if it's built correctly, and training is one of them. Now you simply have a group of people that can be there paid as a position, and then you can bring people in when they're available, when they can do their training. So basically this list that your folks put out, and in answer to your question, absolutely. It is worth your time to continue this process, because I think every one of those would get better with some form of a cooperative agreement or consolidation or authority.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. And then the second question is, okay, let's say we district, and then I know we've talked about scenarios of, okay, the first round turns out it's 4 of the 9, and then maybe as we go along, 3 more join, and then 2 more join. A question I've always had about districts from afar, and now that we're getting closer, I still have the question, do they require exponential growth to maintain viability, in that if we get to a point where all 9 of the districts we're talking to join, and we don't have anyone more to absorb, it was probably a bad term, but are we going to run into problems there? Do we need to keep growing a district to remain viable, or can it reach that level and maintain, or are we worried about not being able to grow a district at some point?
You know, Sheldon may speak to this, but in my experience, the department I was from, South Metro, we grew a great deal. We basically became the evil empires. I think the Darth Vader was even on our t-shirts for a while, because we kept expanding out. The one thing that was a misunderstanding is growth, I think, is based on service delivery. If there is a neighboring agency that needs assistance, that they're not able to meet the bullet points that you see up there, then it is worthy of considering to expand into that area to support that, as long as they don't become, and I hate to use the word burden, but a financial drain on that particular entity. So I think we're not in the business to become a bigger business. We're in the business to take care of people. So I would say that your future will depend on when you can add another entity, will be because it is in the best interest of everybody involved, taking care of their constituents, your constituents, and it is a cooperative effort. Unlike you're a business just trying to grow a larger market. So no, I think you have the option to do all of it and just base it on service delivery. Base it on the needs of the people, then you'll decide whether or not you want to expand this and become a larger organization.
Any thoughts, Zach?
Makes sense. I think my only other question would be really for us is to, I know we want to hear more about that financial piece, but I'd like to understand better what our next steps are, and how that works and who's doing it and what we're doing. But I know that millage rate and financial piece is perhaps the most key part of that discussion. But since we're all here talking about it, it might be good to talk about how and who's doing the next steps.
Well, I can speak on our part. My job is to get you a document that summarizes the current state and the potential future options that you have. I would say that your next step is to allow me to finish this, put it in front of you, and then you folks will start going through that document and digesting it. Then you'll start to make decisions about, you know, do you put together a strategic organization? Do you start, I mean, there's a lot of phases, but I think first you need information. And we're going to get that to you very soon.
And then I'll take it from there. I think once we get that final report, then it behooves every entity within those 9 districts to start the process. And I think some of that goes to staff, and then it'll come back to council, and then we have this cooperative possible movement, looking at phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. That is the natural flow. If I'm not correct. Rich, would you agree?
Absolutely. And, you know, we're going to print many copies of this, and then each entity can sit down and read through it and get an idea of the global perspective of this. And then after they've had time to digest that document, then I think it's time for you folks to come together and have a conversation.
And then I would submit that, you know, when we take a look at that final report, when we look and understand it, and if we see that it's the best for us and others see, then it's up to us to move it, you know, whether that be 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road. But I think we'll have the data and the bandwidth then to really understand what is necessary.
Absolutely. And like the chief mentioned earlier, you folks budgeted for us to help facilitate that next step, the communication. So if you choose to do so after you read this document, and if you still believe it's in the best interest of your constituents, then we can certainly come in and help facilitate those gatherings to start the conversation between 9 departments.
Does that answer for you, Zach? I don't see you on my screen, but.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was giving you the patented Zach thumbs up.
Okay, so then I'll move back to Sal. Sal, any last questions that you might have?
Just really quickly, is the report that you're going to give us, in addition to kind of giving us the financials and, situations for each of the jurisdictions, the 9 jurisdictions that are going to be a part of this, are you going to have a sense going into the meeting or concluding your report, which of the jurisdictions are the likeliest to be on that early list of joiners, or is that really something that waits until after your report is done and we get 8 or 9 peoples together with not too many preconceived notions?
Yeah, I think it's, what is that expression, the chicken and the egg? I think each one of those entities will want to see the results of this study, and then they'll make a decision about where they want to go with it. Our job is to try to keep some sterility to this, take the emotion out of this. And so I think their decision of whether or not, is McMinnville the perfect entity to add to Amity, or so on and so forth, I think that'll come after you folks go through this document and decide if it, and in there it'll just list the pros and cons of all of them. We will have a recommendation of a process, but I think the individual entities are going to have to make some decisions towards the end.
Okay, thank you.
In conclusion, because I'm take us any longer than we need to go this evening. Rich and Sheldon, thank you for, number one, your expertise and the value that you bring to cities and entities such as ourselves that are trying to find the most effective way of bringing fire and EMS services to their communities in the most cost-effective and the most efficient way, and that's what we've been trying to do for years. And just tonight being able to go over this process and now understand it a little more, I truly look forward to the additional work that you're going to be doing. That'll take us 30 to maybe 45 days down the road. That'll give us more specific, verified information. I know there are a few of us that, even though you're going to be doing some verification, but I'd like to take a look at some of the financial. I know Kelly would like to take a look at some of the financial, even if it's not the final result, because financials take you a while to understand, and you can always change the figures. But if you understand the methodology, that can sometimes take a day or two or a week or whatever. And so I know there's a few of us that would love to have access to that financials, since that may be some of the more complicated pieces of that. And I know that that is an area that many members of our council have concerns about.
Absolutely, and I'd be happy to. Matter of fact, your chief has them now.
Okay, great. And so, again, I thank both you and Sheldon for your efforts. I thank the chief and his staff for getting us to this point. And again, we're at the beginning phase of something that's going to take a while, but within 30 to 45 days, I think we're going to have at least the information that then we can bring back to council, have work session, and have a good discussion to know where we need to go. So in conclusion, anyone else have any questions or comments before we conclude our work session this evening? And like I say, I can only see Remy and Kelly at this point, so speak openly if there's any council member that would like to say anything. Well, not hearing anything, then I will bring this work session to a close and adjourn the meeting this evening. Again, thanks, councilors, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this evening. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Folks.
Thank you, everybody.